exalted the humble. He has brought down the mighty from their thrones, and he has exalted the humble. Tore down the princes, and raised up the poor and the humble of this earth. Now, how would he have done that? And I presume we're talking about God. How would he have done that? Now, I'm not suggesting that God sneaks around during an election, stuffing the ballot boxes with names of the more humble candidates. Although I have heard in the past in Belfast, the dead used to get up to vote. So he might have had some involvement in that. In Daniel 4:37, it suggests that God did this to humiliate those who are arrogant. So his words were an expression to humiliate the arrogant amongst us, whoever they might be. And sometimes, to be honest, it is hard to stomach the hypocrisy that at times passes as genuine observation. And I think to some extent that these sacred words are touching on that, touching on the hypocrisy that we confront. Now, Noam Chomsky is not somebody I often agree with, but I actually do admire him. And there is an honesty in his observations, even though I mightn't agree with him. But I was impressed when he said one time, he mentioned President Bush. And he said that President Bush stated that his favorite philosopher was none other than Jesus. Yet, President Bush struggled to imitate his favorite philosopher. Which is fair enough, as to be honest, Jesus is a hard act to imitate. But yet Jesus continuously called out hypocrisy. And last week, when Amir was taking his class with me, his lay preacher class, we chatted about Christology and how each of us understood the nature of Jesus Christ. And that there are many ways, such as Jesus as the second person of the Trinity, Trinitarian, also stating that Jesus is the only, not a Son of God, but the only Son of God, which differs quite radically and dramatically from the position that we see Jesus not as a deity, but a revealer of divine truths, which is closer to the concept of Unitarian. And of course, those who are brought up in the Jewish faith and in the Islamic faith understand as well the nature of the concept of God as one God and not the three gods expressed by Orthodox Christianity. And in a way, there's a common denominator there, which could be agreed as Unitarian. Or finally, Jesus as a Jewish rabbi. And believe it or not, there is a village not far from Jerusalem where there's a Jewish community that accept Jesus as a rabbi. Now, they're not Jews who want to become Christian. They're Jews who accept Jesus as an authentic Jewish teacher and a rabbi. Paula Tabakin, who is well known in Belfast amongst liberal Jews, Paula often described herself as a Junitarian, a cross between being Jewish and Unitarian. Now, Amir and myself agreed that all the positions of Christology only made sense, and there are many others, by the way, if you familiar yourself with the Sermon on the Mount, and that you try to live by the values expressed in that sermon. Essentially, with Amir's training, that will be at the essence of Amir's study, to be a lay preacher with all souls. As a matter of fact, we've made a pact that we will study the Sermon on the Mount together, because I need to learn a good bit about it as much as Amir does. So it'll be the student teaching the teacher, as well as the teacher teaching the student. But thinking of Jesus, the philosopher, and what his philosophy committed to us to, Jesus commented quite a bit on hypocrisy, and reminds us thus with the following from Matthew. How will you say to your brother, let me put out the mote of your eye, and yet behold the beam in your own eye? Hypocrite, first cast out the beam of your own eye. Only then will you see more clearly to cast out the mote in your own eye. It's a very simple message, that when you're wagging your finger at somebody, you're actually, I have to count, you're wagging 3 fingers at yourself. And it's worth remembering that. Jesus is chastising us for seeing the speck in the eye of our neighbours before seeing the speck in our own eye. A simple thing, simply put, seeing the flaws in others before we see the flaws in ourselves. Fortunately, I don't have that problem. Well, actually, I do. Of course I do. And indeed, the nature of our political life throughout democratic systems, and it's essential, it's generally adversarial. Now, our own Westminster Parliament is probably the most adversarial, because if you look at very many other parliaments throughout Europe, they're a circle rather than people facing each other over the dispatch box. Now, I have to say, when I watch parliamentary programs on television, the others bore me to tears. I love Westminster. You're always guaranteed pure entertainment. There's no doubt about it, even though it's so adversarial. And in a way, it's adversarial because you're continuously calling out either the government or, in the government's case, calling out the opposition, accusing the other of being incapable whilst you're perfect. And that actually applies to lots of other spheres within our Western democracies. When I was a trade union official, my job was to go to the Labour Court and expose management as a sham of chancellors. But I was the most virtuous person standing in the room. Fortunately for the Irish Post Office, the Labour Court didn't believe me. But there is a philosophical distinction between different types of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy just doesn't mean one thing. Inconsistency. To give her credit, whether she deserves it or not, that's what Suella Braverman was accusing the Metropolitan Police of, being inconsistent in dealing with different protest groups. And whether they were or whether they weren't the jury is out of that. That was her belief, and it's many other people's belief. But then that applies to all of us. Are we inconsistent in how we deal with one individual and another individual, or one group or another group? Pretense. Attempting to make something that is not the case appear true is a serious element of hypocrisy. Attempting to make something that is not the case appear true. What we call nowadays fake news. And sadly, social media is full of them. It's really impossible to believe anything you see on social media, or any image. There used to be a saying years ago that a photograph tells the story. Not anymore. Not anymore. Photographs lie just like prose or other texts when people are indulging in what is known as pretense of fake news. And yet we try to find somewhere that we can find the essence of truth, or close to the truth. And in our situation here in the United Kingdom, we depend a lot on mainstream media. We rely on mainstream media to tell us the truth. But now we find people calling out mainstream media. Twice this week, and I'm a big fan of the BBC, but twice this week, actually, the BBC had to come back and apologize for statements that it made. One was that it said that the Israeli army targeted medics and Arab-speaking people. It targeted medics and Arab-speaking people in a statement from the IDF. That's what the BBC said. An hour later, they came back and said, we got that wrong. What we meant was there were medics and Arab speakers amongst the personnel of the IDF. Doesn't matter what your position on what's happening is, it was a serious error of judgment. Maybe it wasn't fake news, maybe it was a genuine mistake, but it was a serious mistake. And then regarding ourselves here, the BBC said this week, Lyra McKee, the young journalist that was killed up in Derry, who actually came to this church on a number of occasions. Lyra McKee was killed in Crossfire. Lyra McKee was killed in Crossfire. That was said on the BBC this week. Nothing could be further from the truth. She was not killed in Crossfire. Lyra was killed when a single bullet was fired in the direction of the police and tragically hit Lyra McKee and killed her. There was nobody else shooting, only this one group. So that was a serious mistake, and I hope they do correct it. But it is a problem that was pretense or fake news. And if they apologize for it, maybe they will clearly show that it was a genuine mistake. And then blame. Blame is another aspect of hypocrisy. Clearly identifying those you believe are responsible, even though you may be complicit yourself. So you point out other people who are responsible for an incident happening, yet you may also be complicit, but you refuse to recognize that. You proportion blame to others, but never recognize that you may have been involved or complicit in something happening. Finally, complacency. Feeling smug or uncritical satisfaction with oneself or one's own achievements. being incredibly proud of one's own self and your achievements and smug about them. I always think that's more a man thing than a woman thing. And I think I'm probably right on that. Mansplaining. Oh, let me tell you how this works. How you fix the fuse. Believing we should not be held to the same standards as others is another serious aspect of hypocrisy. Believing that standards that apply to other people or other countries don't apply to us. That we're not obliged to perform according to those standards. Now, I have to say, when I read all of them, I thought to myself, should I laugh on that? I can recognize myself in all of them, every one of them that I've read out to you. I can see where I have done exactly what it's saying. And I've done it without any sense of remorse, and done it because I believe that was the situation. When you go back to fake news, I remember a friend of mine, a writer in Dublin, said, never tell a story as how it happened, always tell it as how it should have happened. And I always thought that was a great idea. Yet it's really fake news. Embellish the story. And it's not an Irish characteristic. We're a nation of storytellers. So we exaggerate the story. And we don't care if half it's not true. It's entertaining. And that's the most important part of it. Complacency. I'm trying to think what my achievements are. But I'm sure I have felt, oh yeah, I wrote that or I did that. Blame, I've often blamed other people. As I said when I was a trade union official, I blamed everybody but myself and my members. My members were beyond reproach. They were the best mail delivery people you could employ anywhere. Now, however, since I became a minister a number of years ago, in order to deal with all